This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, and I'm Yves Engler. Today we're going to talk about Congo, a tortured land, and the recent developments in Eastern Congo, uh, which is the latest wave of Rwandan violence that has taken over Rwandan forces and their proxies, taken over the main city in the east of Congo, Goma. But before getting into this question, I wanted to do a little bit of a brief history of Canada's role in supporting imperialism in the Congo. And there is this long under discussed history. Going back to 1887, William Stairs, trained at the Royal Military College in Kingston, was one of 10 white officers among the first European expedition to cross the interior of the continent, which left a trail of death, disease, and destruction. A few years later, the Halifax native led nearly 2,000 person mission to conquer the Katanga region, eastern Congo, on behalf of Belgian King Leopold II. Canadian missionaries during this period, Canadian missionaries assisted Leopold's brutal rubber extraction economy. Decades later, Canada had a trade attaché during the Belgian rule, effectively supporting Belgian rule. During the 1950s, Canada, through NATO Mutual Assistance Program, provided significant arms training to Belgian pilots while they were maintaining their colonial rule in Congo and suppressing independence movements. After independence, Canada was a major player, probably the third major player after the Belgians and the U.S. in the demise of Patrice Lumumba, the independence leader that was pushing for a broader decolonization beyond just the political realm that included the vast mineral resources of the Congo. Canadian forces through the UN played an important role in undermining Lumumba, and then Canadian Barthoum, who is the head of the military mission, UN mission, he played an important role in having Lumumba recaptured by Mobutu, and ultimately Lumumba was assassinated. In more recent years, Canadian mining companies have big players in the Congo, and they've done so with Canadian government support. So when the UN has cited Canadian mining companies for their abuses in the Congo, the Canadian government has come to the defense of Canadian mining companies. When a Canadian mining company had a big dispute, First Quantum, Vancouver company, the Canadian government actually in 2010 blocked debt forgiveness for the Congolese on behalf of the Canadian mining company to pressure the Congo to better negotiate with the Canadian mining company. So there's this long history of Canadian involvement, Canadian support for imperialism in the Congo that's little discussed. Today, as we see hundreds of thousands of people being displaced, and we have a foreign invasion of the Congo. Once again, we have Canada in a different way, but nonetheless assisting, enabling this violent intervention in Eastern Congo. To discuss this question, we have the author of In Praise of Blood, The Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Force, Judi Rever, who has been following this issue for many years. Thanks a lot for coming on Talking Foreign Policy, Judi. And just to start off, can you just talk about what's happened in the last few weeks of fighting in Goma and around Goma?
Thanks for having me. Yes, over the last few days in Eastern Congo, the regional capital Goma has been under siege by Rwanda and its military proxy, the M23. It's now confirmed, unfortunately, that Rwandan forces have taken control of Goma. That's a city of about 2 million people. It's also home to, as you mentioned, hundreds of thousands of other Congolese civilians who have been displaced by the war in Eastern Kivu. A war that has reemerged over the last 3 years. The most immediate concern is the state of these displaced people and of Goma citizens who have been caught in the crossfire between, on the one side, Congolese forces, their South African National Defense Force allies and the UN peacekeepers. And on the other side, Rwandan forces and M23 rebels. So hundreds of people have been wounded from mortar and gunfire. Countless are dead in the streets. The hospitals are overwhelmed. There are many NGOs in Goma, many international personnel as well. Water, electricity, and internet have been cut off. So it's pretty dire. I was in touch with the head of an NGO earlier today, and she said the civil society is begging Rwanda to open, and other belligerents to open up a humanitarian corridor. So that's very serious. But what is extremely worrying as well is it looks like Kagame's troops are really gaining ground here. There are reports that his rebel allies, his forces and their rebel allies have seized not only Goma, but areas around Kalungu, Kanyazire, Muwinja, and Nyabibwe toward the southern capital, southern Kivu capital of Bukavu. That's closer to Burundi. So what we are witnessing is already a regional war that could potentially bring in Burundi. This is extremely worrying, but it appears that the UN Security Council, not surprisingly, has so far refused to slap sanctions on Rwanda for violating international law, invading another country, and committing crimes. So Western countries have not halted their military cooperation or suspended ties with Rwanda, although Germany did say yesterday that it has put aid talks on hold with Kigali. So I would say that, as usual, Rwanda is benefiting from impunity. Rwanda and M23 forces have killed South African soldiers on the weekend in battle. And so there are now strong calls by Congo that the United Nations should no longer allow Rwandan troops to serve in peacekeeping missions in Sudan and the Central African Republic. You have to know that Rwanda is the second most important contributor in peacekeepers, soldiers, and police in UN peacekeeping missions. So the irony, it's surreal. The Rwandan forces are killing UN peacekeepers, South African soldiers working with UN mission, and yet they are an important contributor, contributor to the UN. So also Rwanda has provided security for French natural gas interests in northern Mozambique. It's a $20 billion project. So the Congolese are furious. They see the West complicit in the overtaking and the invasion, and a number of protesters yesterday attacked embassies in Kinshasa, Western embassies. So that's the other side of the country, the West side, but it's really serious.
And this fighting has been going on for a few years now. The M23 in Rwanda has invaded this latest phase going back 3 years.
Mhm.
And the UN has reported there's been thousands of Rwandan troops, so that's very, that's confirmed, though Rwanda denies it. But so can you tell us a little bit about how this fits into the history, this last 3 years of Rwandan M23 violence in Eastern Congo, how that fits into a history of Rwandan aggression against its neighbor?
Well, the military gains that Kagame's troops are now making are evoking fears of a wider African war that we saw in the late 1990s, early 2000s. That was a war that embroiled 9 African nations and, many armed groups. But I mean, so essentially, Kagame's henchmen have been waging war in Congo off and on for 3 decades. They've created a succession of militia called the AFDL in 1996, the RCD, the CNDP, the M23. ostensibly to secure political power, extend political power of Kigali in Congo, secure land, and exploit minerals for nearly 3 decades. And the tragedy is that Kagame's gotten away with this. He's the godfather of some of the nastiest warlords in the Great Lakes region of Africa, and he himself has never been charged by the International Criminal Court.
So and when we talk about this in '96, he actually marched his forces backing, with a rebel group at the front. They marched all the way to Kinshasa and they ousted the government. And then when the people they put into office power turned on them or asked them to leave the country, then they reinvaded in 1998, which you referred to this multi-country war, which we're talking about millions and millions of people that were killed over multi, 5 years or exactly how long it went on for. And so you touched a little bit on the economic question or some of the mineral interests. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that question of some of the sort of economic interests that may be driving this violence?
Well, I mean, the economic interests in Congo are huge. Congo's the biggest producer in the world of cobalt and coltan. These are strategic minerals for our economy. Congo produces about 70% of the global supply of cobalt, which is essential for batteries, for electric vehicles, and in military applications. Cobalt's mined industrially, whereas coltan is an artisanally mined mineral, and it's essential for our cell phones, our computers, in defense, space, and space applications. So aviation as well. So the world economy in many ways starts in Congo, and right now the global markets are getting these minerals for cheap, especially tantalum, which is a derivative of coltan. And so what is particularly worth understanding or being reminded of is that tantalum or coltan is mined, is mostly exported by Rwanda, and Rwandan mafias and its networks and proxies have seized control of the eastern ground zero for coltan production, which is a place called Rubaya. And, they've been in control of Rubaya since about April of last year, maybe a little bit after April, but it's been several months. And so, Rwanda seems to be has gotten away with a lot of crimes, but it's also a world hub for 3T. So 3T these are artisanal minerals, tantalum, tin, and tungsten. And these are valuable minerals that are critical for the world economy. And I should say as well that China buys a lot of minerals from Rwanda. I mean, of course, the world economy could be buying directly and should be buying directly artisanal minerals from Congo, but it's not doing that. It's buying, knowing full well that Rwanda is sending its proxies into Congo and its own forces, is trafficking these minerals. And the big tech knows that this is going on, but major suppliers for big tech, refiners, etc., are buying directly from Rwanda. So they're enabling these crimes. As far as Canadian companies per se, I mean, I know Ivanhoe is a company, a Vancouver-based company. It's invested in a big copper project. And Ivanhoe was accused of violating rights of Congolese in recent years by evicting many Congolese in order to expand mining operations in Katanga. But most of these, human rights violations and multinationals enabling this are, all around the world. So I've written in my book, In Praise of Blood, that you mentioned, how Canadian companies very early on in the 1990s, at the start of this, when Kagame ousted Mobutu and plunged Congo into decades of war, Canadian companies, or Canadian listed companies, American Mineral Fields, which was founded in Canada but based in Arkansas, and Tenke Mining, whose that's a Canadian company, whose big investors were the Swedish Canadian group Lundin. They bankrolled Laurent Kabila's rebel group in 1996, 97. And of course, the AFDL, Laurent Kabila's group, was a front for Kagame when he unseated Mobutu in 1997. So we do have a role in what I feel is the very beginning of these crimes, these decades of violence that has overwhelmed the country and that has ultimately killed millions of people.
Yeah, there's all kinds of sort of bizarre. Banro is another Canadian company that's been kind of involved in sketchy dealings in the east of Congo, tied
Mhm.
into war fighting. But there's also all kinds of bizarre things like the sort of short-lived Canadian peacekeeping mission in '96 to what effectively provided a cover for what made it so the French didn't lead the mission. So, so that enabled Kagame's intervention and stuff like that. So Canada's had this role also, and as you've pointed out, going back to in terms of supporting Kagame, or Romeo Dallaire's role and others in all the violence that swept up Rwanda in the years previous. But now more up to date to today, it's still this situation where, this isn't just like a history. This is literally like the Canadian government put out a statement on Sunday about the violence in Eastern Congo, and they don't even mention, they refer to, I think, foreign troops in some vague sense. They don't even mention Rwanda's intervention. Can you talk about a little bit about Trudeau's ties to Kagame and sort of the ties between Canada and sort of support for Kagame amidst all of this recent violence and maybe the history as well?
Well, I mean, it's outrageous. The statement that was issued on Sunday that you referred to, um, radio silence on the principal, Canada's radio silence on the principal instigator of the violence, and over of the people who are overtaking Goma and responsible for displacing, which is Kagame, and his troops. It's the Rwanda, and unfortunately, as you mentioned, the reemergence of this rebellion and invasion, which started 3 years ago, in late 2000, 2021, 6 months after that rebellion was unleashed, the Canadian government under Trudeau decided to open up an embassy in Kigali and reaffirm and reestablish better relations with Rwanda. So strengthen ties, with the idea that it needed to, doesn't matter whether or not these are African dictatorships that oppress African people. The foreign minister at the time, Mélanie Joly, clearly stated that Canada had to fight against Chinese and Russian influence on the African continent. So there's absolutely no regard for human rights in Canadian foreign policy here. I mean, it's so absurd. It's very offensive to the Congolese. It was an affront at the time when Joly announced this. I mean, we've talked about Romeo Dallaire before. Romeo Dallaire, who headed in 1994 during the Rwandan genocide the UN peacekeeping mission in Kigali. He was a Canadian general. He has set up, through the Dallaire Institute, a program ostensibly to set up to combat the use of child soldiers in Africa. He's established the main African training center in Kigali, something called the African Center of Excellence for Children, Peace, and Security. More obfuscation. This institute now provides millions of dollars from the Canadian government to an army, to the Rwandan army, that is systematically violating international law. So millions of Canadian dollars are funding an army that's killing, raping Congolese civilians and forcibly recruiting child soldiers for combat in Congo. So this is enabling crimes at its worst. I would say that's, if we want to be brief, that's our Canadian foreign policy at the moment, which is complicit. So I would say Canada's complicit in this humanitarian mess.
And what you referred to at Roman Dallaire Institute, that was so egregious that even Global Affairs Canada employees basically were very uncomfortable about it. But it was sort of superseded at some higher up political level to continue the $20 million in funding to that project. Thanks a lot for talking to us about what's going on in Eastern Congo and some of Canada's role. Again, Judi Rever is the author of In Praise of Blood, The Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, that came out in 2018. People looking to understand a bit of what's going on there today would do well to pick up that book. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.